Hey guys, I just got done watching the series, I don't know if you know right now, finale of Daredevil Born Again. So time for another Lego Dimension video. I think my plan for these videos going forward is for every episode but the finale, I'm just gonna do the costumes, and then the finale is gonna be a level. So for Heaven's half hour, this would, for the costume from Heaven's half hour, it would be Daredevil, Matt Murdock in his apartment attire, Karen in her attire from when they went to Josie's, and then Foggy, Harvey, then Wilson Fisk in his dinner attire from this episode, Vanessa Fisk in her attire from this episode, and then Murdock and Karen in their attire from, spoiler alert, Foggy's murder trial, and then Benjamin Poindexter in his attire from this episode, and then Wilson Fisk in his election strategy meeting attire, and then and Cherry in their attires from their coffee date, and then Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk in their attires from their meeting with each other in the diner, and then Matt and Cherry in their dinner date attire, and then Wilson Fisk in his attire from his election victory party, and then for optics, it would be Matt Murdock in his New Year's Eve attire, Wilson Fisk in his first mayor attire, and Daniel in their attire from Fisk's first day briefing, and then Dollar as a prisoner, and then Matt Murdock in his attire from when he goes to meet Hector before his trial, and then we would have Matt and Hector in their attire from Hector's trial, and then we would get BB Urich, and then in her attire from this episode, and then Fisk in his police officer funeral attire, and then from her Kurt Kirsten in her attire with her meeting with Soledad, and then Soledad himself, and then then we would get White Tiger, and then also Wilson and Vanessa in their attire from their therapy appointment from this episode, and then Matt Murdock in his attire from when he had to chase Nikki, and then that same attire without glasses, and then with broken glasses, and then for the hollow of his hand, you would get Matt Murdock in his visitation attire, and then Wilson, Vanessa, and Sheila in their attire from the hijacking briefing, and then Matt Murdock in his attire from the bathroom confrontation with Officer Powell, and then Officer Powell in both his attire from that same confrontation and Hector's trial, and Nicky Torres in his attire from that trial, and then attire from when he's recapping that trial. I forget who, honestly. And then Wilson and Vanessa in their therapy appointment from this episode, in his attire from their therapy appointment from this episode. And then Matt and Sherry in their attire from the victory dinner for Hector's trial. And then Tiger unmasked. And then Officer Cole disguised as the Punisher. And then for Sic Semper Systema, it'll be Matt and Angela Ayala in their morgue attire, and then BB in her club attire, Wilson and Vanessa in their therapy appointment attire from this episode, and then Leroy Bradford in prison, and then Matt when he's meeting Leroy, Matt from Leroy's trial, and then Howell's attire from this episode, and then Wilson Fisk and Wilson Fisk, Sheila and Daniel from when they go to the harbor, and then Wilson Fisk from when he visits the Lincoln Middle School choir, and then Sheila, Daniel, and Wilson from the Union Buster, and then Frank Castle's attire from this episode, Wilson and Vanessa's dinner attire from this episode, and then Heather's attire from this episode for With Interest. It would be Matt Murdock in his attire from when the bank gets robbed, and then Yusuf Khan in his attire from this episode, and then Devlin in his robber as a robber, and then I didn't get his name, but he seemed important enough to include, but the red robber, both with and without his mask, and then Angie Kim, Devlin, Yusuf Khan without his sweater, and then Matt Murdock, when he's pretending to be a hostage, and then Devlin in his cop disguise, and Matt Murdock in his robber disguise from Excessive Force. It would be Matt Murdock when he's praying, and then in his hotel room, and then Heather's attire from this episode, and then Angela Ayala's attire from this episode, and then Muse, and then Wilson and Vanessa in their attire from the port funding dinner, and then Cherry and Daniel's attire from this episode, and then Matt Murdock when Angela is kidnapped, and Wilson Fisk visiting Adam, and then for art's sake, it would be for art's sake, it would be Wilson Fisk and Daniel in their attire from this episode, and then Angela Ayala in the hospital, and then Heather in a robe, and then Matt Murdock from the makeout session. I didn't know what else to call that outfit. And then Cherry's attire from this episode, and then Vanessa when she's meeting with Luca, then Heather from when she's meeting with Heather from Bastion's appointment, and Bastion from that same appointment, and then Heather after Bastion carved Muse into her arm, and then Officer Cole from this episode, and then Bibi's attire from this episode, and then Heather in the hospital, and then Wilson Fisk from his press conference on Muse's death, and then for Isle of Joy, it would be Benjamin Poindexter as a prisoner, and then Matt Murdock in the morning, and then Matt Murdock with a jacket, and then Heather, Daniel, Kristen, and Sheila's attire from this episode, and then Cherry from his attire from this episode, and Josie, and then Benjamin Poindexter in his restraints, and then Daniel, Bibi, Vanessa, Wilson, Matt, and Heather in their attire for the black and white ball. Then Swordsman, then Officer Powell in his attire from that episode, and then Benjamin Poindexter disguised as a security guard, and then Matt after he's been shot, and Wilson Fisk with the blood stain from that, and then for the finale, Straight to Hell, this will be the level. So for the first part of the level, it'll be Vanessa Fisk and Benjamin Poindexter during the flashback when they're signing the contract, and then Poindexter from the black and white ball leading up to the ending of last episode, and then for the second part, it'll be a it'll be that thing where like it's two locations at once. One location would be Matt, Kirsten, and Karen in their attire from the hospital discussing the shooting, and Fisk and Buck in there. And then the other location would be Wilson Fisk and Buck discussing Matt's condition in their attire from that meeting. And then the third part would be Sheila and Officer Powell as they're leaving the hospital. And then the fourth part of the level would be Daredevil and Punisher fighting their riot officers. And then the fifth part of the level would be Daniel and Buck during the department meeting in their attire from that meeting. And then for the sixth part of the level, it'll be Daredevil unmasked and Karen sitting in the storage closet. Karen has a new outfit here as well. And then for the seventh part, it's Punisher fighting the police officers at the port. And then for the eighth part of the level, it'll be a two locations at once sequence. The one location would continue from above, and then the other would be Wilson Fisk as he's kicking the gang leader, and then some other characters and outfits from this episode that didn't fit into the playable sections would be Karen as she's having surgery to remove the bullet, Luke Cage, Officer Powell disguised as the Punisher, the young not Murdock from his young flashback, and Frank Castle as he's being held captive. Thanks for watching. Uploads aren't frequent because they're based on movies I've seen in theaters, and the finale air dates for the Marvel Disney Plus series. So yeah, bye.